What up, though? Have I been crippled? Have you? Did you build your dwelling? Do you hunt the animals you gonna eat tonight for dinner? Do you got your own water source? Do you manage your own waste? You composting? Do you know how to build a fire? A fire to provide you with light in the darkness? Do you know what you would use in order to maintain that flame? Do you make your own clothing? Do you sow? Cultivate your own crops and reap the harvest? What do you know how to do? What am I capable of doing that actually benefits me without needing somebody else? Have I been crippled to the point that I've never realized that I don't think for myself? Am I capable of determining whether something is true or false, illusion or reality? Vox, the day Philadelphia bombed its own people. An oral history of a 1985 police bombing that changed the city forever by Lindsay Norwood, August 2019. The city of Philadelphia dropped the Satchel Bomb, a demolition device typically used in combat, laced with Tavex and C4 explosives on the MOVE organization, who were living in West Philadelphia row home known to be occupied by men, women, and children. It went up in unextinguished flames. 11 people were killed, including 5 children and the founder of the organization. 61 homes were destroyed, and more than 250 citizens were left homeless. The confrontation with MOVE would be remembered as an ordeal that transformed the fabric of the city. The show of force, unjustified to many, solidified mistrust between Philadelphia's residents and government. MOVE was founded in 1972 and still exists today, though its membership numbers are unknown. Members lived communally and described themselves as a family. In non-violent but disruptive demonstrations, members protested at zoos, pet stores, and political rallies. The group believed in composting, homeschooling, and a diet of raw foods, and spoke out against war and police brutality. Sound like good people. Let's shake it. Mayor Frank Rizzo, notorious for a volatile relationship with black residents and activist groups, ordered the group to be removed from their home. The confrontation ended in the death of a police officer for which 9 members of MOVE, nicknamed the MOVE 9, were controversially convicted and given life sentences. After they'd spent 3 years on Osage Avenue, then Mayor Wilson Goode, the first African American mayor of Philadelphia, gave the order to evict them. Only two people survived the bombing. Ramona Africa, then 29, and a child, Birdie Africa, then 13. Both were badly burned. Survivor Ramona Africa immediately went on to serve 7 years in prison on rioting and conspiracy charges for arrest warrants from before the bombing. Neighbors returned to shoddy construction in 1986, and by the early 2000s, 2/3 of the neighborhood was bought out by the city. Today, the houses are largely vacant. The bombing, now deemed one of the worst tragedies in the history of Philadelphia, the MOVE bombing, remains largely forgotten nationally. Diane J., a resident of the neighborhood. I went to hang out at the home of my friends-in-laws that day. It was a beautiful day outside, a beautiful neighborhood. The police knocked on the door and told us everyone had to leave. There was a swarm of police officers outside. Akin Wilson, then a next-door neighbor of MOVE. The cops evacuated our block the night before. A lot of families went to shelters or hotels. Andrea Walls, writer and resident of the neighborhood. That morning, there was an announcement the police commissioner made over a bullhorn. I'll never forget it. Gregor Sambour, then Philadelphia police commissioner, in testimony. With the bullhorn, I read the message. Ramona Africa, lone adult survivor of bombing, in 2015 interview with Press TV. Police Commissioner Gregor Sambour came out and said, "Attention, MOVE. This is America. You have to abide by the laws and rules of the United States." Words to that effect. I'm still trying to figure out what he meant by that. Yeah, me too. Is it America or is it the United States? After they made that announcement, they didn't just try to wait us out or anything. What was the hurry? Albert Revel, then Philadelphia police sergeant, in testimony. The tactical plan, as I understood it, was to remove the MOVE people and all the people from the houses safely by causing a diversion on the roof, and by then inducing an amount of CS gas in a sufficient concentration to make those people come out of the house. Ramona Africa, lone adult survivor of bombing, in 2010 interview with Angola News. They aimed 4 water cannons at our home. We were all in the basement and the water was just pouring down on us for the longest time. Mind you, this is when there was no fire at all. Michael Moses Ward, lone child survivor, also known as Birdie Africa, in testimony. We was in the cellar for a while and tear gas started coming in and we got the blankets and they was wet. Angie Lofton, a resident of the neighborhood. I went to work and turned on the news. I saw clouds of tear gas and the gunfire started. It was rapid fire. I couldn't believe it. I had heard the MOVE kids were supposed to be picked up by the authorities at Cobbs Creek Parkway before any action was supposed to happen. It was horrifying to know that they were still in the house. Wilson Goode, then mayor of Philadelphia, during a press conference. There was no way to extract ourselves from that situation except by armed confrontation. William Brown III, chair of the Special Investigation Move Commission. The Move people didn't have any automatic weapons. The police fired so many rounds of ammunition, at least 10,000, into that building during the day, that they had to send up to the police headquarters to get more. Andrea Walls, writer and a resident of the neighborhood. How could they decide to fire 10,000 rounds of ammunition into a building with women and children? And men too. It was absolutely insane. Ron Archer, a resident of the neighborhood block, of the neighboring block. Helicopters were everywhere. I saw a bomb drop. Michael Moses Ward, also known as Birdie Africa. That's when the big bomb went off. It shook the whole house up. Gregor Sambor, then Philadelphia Police Commissioner, in testimony. I'd recommended that the best way to use an explosive entry device to blow a hole in the roof to insert gas. Akin Wilson, then a next-door neighbor of Move. We watched our house started to go up in flames. Angie Lofton, a resident of the neighborhood. At the back of our house, the kids playing in their yards were yelling, "Ouch, ouch," because they were getting singed from ash falling, singed from ash falling. Wilson Good, then mayor of Philadelphia. The one thing we did that went wrong was when the percussion grenade was dropped. It caused a fire. That was an accident. Diane J., a resident of the neighborhood. We were devastated. I was angry, heartbroken. It was a beautiful home. They were travelers. They had things that were priceless, and they lost everything. Everything. Andrea Walls, writer and resident of the neighborhood. The building is on fire with firemen on the scene, and everyone agrees not to fight the fire and to allow 60 homes to burn. Y'all are serving misdemeanor warrants, and this is where we end up at the end of the day. Ramona Africa, lone adult survivor of bombing. We immediately tried to get our children, our animals, ourselves out of the burning building. We were hollering, "We're coming out." The cops immediately started shooting, trying to prevent anybody from coming out of that house. We were forced back in at least twice. William Brown III, chairperson of the Special Investigation Move Commission. Police officers denied using gunfire, though it is unclear why Move members would choose to run back into the fire. Diane J., a resident of the neighborhood. My friend's husband, who was a Move member, was killed in the fire. Debbie Africa, member of Move 9, released from prison in 2018. A prison guard came to our cells and told Janine, Janet, and Sue, "They just had a firebombing at your house and your children are dead." Michael Africa Sr., member of Move 9, released from prison in 2018. Unbelievable that a government would do that to its own people. Ron Archer, a resident of the neighboring block. The stab to the heart was when the buyout happened. The old people left. 90% of those people took it. It was a close-knit community. This is from Zen Education Project, Teaching People's History. May 13th, 1985, Philadelphia police bomb Move. On May 13th, 1985, the Philadelphia Police Department dropped a C4 bomb on the home of the MOVE organization, killing 11 people, including 5 children, and wiping out 61 homes in 2 city blocks. MOVE is founded by John Africa Sr. in 1972. The name is not an acronym, but an emphasis of their living philosophy. Each individual life is dependent on every other life, and all life has a purpose. So all living beings, things that move, are equally important, whether they are human beings, dogs, birds, fish, trees, ants, weeds, rivers, rain, or wind or rain. So all living beings, things that move, all living beings, things that move, are equally important, whether they are human beings, dogs, birds, fish, trees, ants, weeds, rivers, wind, or rain. Socially and environmentally focused, MOVE members attended protests and supported animal rights, environmental justice, and racial justice since its founding. In Philadelphia, they were targets for police harassment, raids, and arrest, including a violent home invasion in 1978, which Mike Africa Jr. described in Salon. In the 1980s, MOVE relocated from a home in Powelton Village to a row house on Osage Avenue in a black middle-class neighborhood of West Philadelphia. Some of the neighbors complained to the city about MOVE. MOVE was ordered to leave the home by the city. When MOVE refused to leave, the police chose to react with force and deadly violence. Long wanting to evict MOVE, the force prepared for a siege in spring 1985. On May 13, 1985, nearby local residents were told to evacuate but could return to their homes the following day. Nearly 500 officers in SWAT gear, backed by heavy artillery and an anti-tank machine gun, surrounded the block. A shot fired from inside the MOVE residence was met by a volley of over 10,000 rounds in 90 minutes, all shot into the home. 5 fire trucks pumped gallons of water through the basement, and tear gas was thrown into the windows of the home. MOVE members hid in the basement of the home, holding children in the air to avoid drowning in rising waters. The all-day standoff led to the city dropping a C4 bomb on the rooftop of the home. 65 neighborhood homes were destroyed, and over 200 residents lost their homes. 11 people, including John Africa and 5 children of MOVE members, were killed by the bomb. The street was decimated. Over 60 homes were destroyed and leveled by the city. Nearby homes that were left standing were boarded up and abandoned. In 2021, it was reported that the remains of 2 of the girls murdered in the explosion were stored at the Penn Museum of the University of Pennsylvania. Mike Africa Jr. remembered Tree, the 14-year-old, as being sensitive and brave. When we would be at the park, she would run, scour the park for the biggest tree, so she could climb it. Digital Commons at Wayne State, Volume 10, Issue 1, Conflict Processing. Sociological Practice, Article 15, January 1992, MOVE, Philadelphia Bombing, A Conflict Resolution History. Paul Warhaftig, Hizkias Asefa. MOVE, Philadelphia Bombing, A Conflict Resolution History. Father Paul Washington recalls seeing Philadelphia Mayor Wilson Goode in church in April 1985, the mayor told him he was going to have to do something about the radical Back to Nature group MOVE. I am going to have to move very carefully and cautiously because we want to avoid making any of the mistakes that were made back in 1978. A month later, on May 13th, 1985, an assault on MOVE's Osage Avenue headquarters began. Police shot 10,000 rounds of ammunition in 90 minutes and finally dropped the bomb from a helicopter, incinerating 5 MOVE members and 6 children and destroying 61 homes. Back there in 1978, a long brewing series of conflicts with MOVE erupted. What mistakes was Mayor Goode trying to avoid? MOVE began in the early 1970s as a nonviolent, predominantly black counterculture. It originally called itself the Movement. Its founder, John Africa, advocated an anti-technology approach, respect for animal life, and communal living. MOVE is often labeled as an urban, back-to-nature group. Back to nature, back to life, back to reality. The stage was now set for a more successful intervention. MOVE supporters approached Walt Palmer. Palmer was an established businessman and civil rights activist with many connections. His goals of intervention were to avoid violence and to produce a settlement that met the needs of both parties. Palmer chose Oscar Gaskins, a black civil rights attorney, to negotiate. Gaskins obtained a power of attorney from MOVE to represent it in negotiations. This gave him credibility as MOVE's attorney negotiator. Gaskins created a solution that met the interests of both parties. He suggested the prisoners be allowed to appeal their sentences. The Superior Court could then release them on their own recognizance. They were likely to be acquitted on appeal, and if not, most of their sentence had been served already. Both parties agreed. MOVE complied with much of the agreement. They cleaned the building and allowed a health inspection, which passed. A firearms inspection found only inoperative weapons. The district attorney talked about the seriousness of the charges. He stated he started requiring MOVE members to appear in court with Gaskins, and MOVE felt violated by the agreement. The DA changed his mind and felt he was legally bound to compel MOVE to attend court. Even more difficult was the requirement for MOVE to relocate within 90 days. Many groups tried to find MOVE rural retreats to practice their back-to-nature concepts. At one point, they were ready to move to a farm in New Jersey donated by a black farmer. However, during the 90-day period, MOVE got the impression from a conversation with the farmer that he wanted to use them for slave labor. They refused his offer. The city solicitor was quoted in the newspaper that as soon as the MOVE premises were vacated, the city would bulldoze it. This incensed MOVE members who felt they could continue to use their property for other than residential purposes. At the end of the 90-day period, the judge declared MOVE had broken the agreement. He deputized the police to forcibly evict MOVE and arrest its members. After allowing Palmer and a few others to make last-minute appeals for MOVE to surrender, the police moved in. MOVE members were finally brought out of the house. One was severely beaten in front of TV cameras. Jerry Africa one of the three political prisoners, states that MOVE operated on a consensus process that involved all members, whether present or not. If he, in prison, disagreed with the commitment made by MOVE negotiators in the House, then the commitment was not binding on any MOVE member. Benny Swans of the Crisis Intervention Network planned a promising approach. His agency had good street contacts with MOVE. He felt that MOVE was really after an orderly process by which each of the 10 cases could be reviewed. Since the Crisis Intervention Network was city funded, Swans sought clearance from the city manager's office to pursue negotiations. He was turned away. An investigative commission issued a report condemning the assault as being excessively violent and bungled. A local grand jury was formed and issued no indictments against any public officials. Ramona Africa, sole survivor of the Osage bombing, was convicted and served time in the state penitentiary on riot-related charges. John Africa died in the inferno. The New York Times Magazine. She was killed by the police. Why were her bones in a museum? Patricia Dotson's remains were studied, disputed, displayed, and litigated. Lost in the controversy was the life of an American girl and her family. By Bronwyn Dickey, 2022. In early 2019, Janet Monge, then an associate curator at the University of Pennsylvania's Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology, filmed a class called Real Bones: Adventures in Forensic Anthropology for the online education platform Coursera. Though she was trained as a paleoanthropologist, Monge had consulted on several high-profile forensics cases over the years, including one of Philadelphia's most notorious catastrophes, the 1985 police bombing of the predominantly black religious group known as MOVE. They made a mistake. Thus far, we haven't heard anything about religion. I think what more accurately describes them as is the back to nature, back to life, back to reality. Let's shake it. Unprecedented in the history of U.S. police violence, the aerial attack on a residential home triggered an inferno that killed 11 people, 5 of them children, and devoured more than 60 homes in a close-knit African-American neighborhood. All of this happened just 1 mile from where Monge grew up. Patricia and Netta were still toddlers when their mothers followed her Uncle Conrad Hampton into a West Philadelphia religious commune called the Christian Movement for Life, which was eventually shortened to MOVE. Its leader was Vincent Leppert, a charismatic local handyman who renamed himself John Africa and believed that only a complete rejection of modern society, the system, could heal the immorality and inequality it produced. He revered Mom Nature and vowed to protect all life. Death was merely a cycling of the natural order. The smart, idealistic young people who joined his revolution wore their hair in dreadlocks, renounced most technology, and adopted the family name Africa as a sign of loyalty. MOVE would give Patricia her own nickname, Tree, and later just Tree. The group lived without electricity in a ramshackle Victorian house 1 mile north of the Penn Museum in the Powelton Village neighborhood, where John Africa insisted that all children be raised free of system training. Tree and Netta ran naked most of the time and weren't allowed to eat cooked food or visit doctors. They never attended school or learned to read and write. Instead, they bathed in creeks and slept on the floor, waking up at dawn to run in place and do push-ups. Beyond their supervised visits to play in a local park, the girls' main connection to modern life came by way of their Aunt Zelma, who sometimes stopped by to sneak them out for candy. Unfortunately, Aunt Zelma, you was a part of the problem. It said the girl's main connection to modern life. And then they mentioned Aunt Zelma, who took them out for candy. So they're associating candy with modern life. The girl's main connection to modern life. Every moment is a right now moment. How do most of you associate yourselves with modern life? You look at one of the small or large squares or rectangles, or what you might call a phone, a tablet, a laptop, a desktop, a TV. Is this the way you associate yourself with modern life? With candy? Let's shake it. At first, Move's bohemian neighbors admired the group's passion for defending animal rights and protesting police brutality. Were they strange? Yes. But Powelton Village in the 1970s was full of strange people. Strange people. One investigator from the city's Department of Public Welfare wrote in 1975, "It does not appear that the children are neglected." Of course they're not neglected. They're bathing in a creek, whereas you bathe in water that's treated with chlorine and fluoride. And then what happens? You want a hot bath. So now the bathroom is a gas chamber. And you add bubbles. Another 40 ingredients to the already suffocating gas. Let's shake it. Back in Philadelphia, the city's manager, Frank Rizzo, the city's mayor, Frank Rizzo, vowed to evict the young black revolutionaries whom he derided as not even human beings. Wow. Black revolutionaries. Listen to these terms. Black revolutionaries, not even human beings. It's revolutionary to connect with nature. They brandish rifles and refuse to go. Remember what they said when they went in the house. Inoperable. They found weapons that couldn't even be operated, that couldn't even function. It's what they say they found. Now they brandish rifles and refuse to go. The city responded by blockading their compound. The standoff, which lasted 15 months, ended on August 8, 1978, when Rizzo ordered a police assault on the group's Powelton Village headquarters. Women and children cowered in the basement as a bulldozer rammed through the fence and a water cannon gushed through a window in an effort to flood them out. The violence so disturbed federal officials that the U.S. Department of Justice filed a civil rights lawsuit against the city of Philadelphia for creating a culture of police brutality that shocked the conscience. In January 1980, Richmond authorities, acting on reports of naked, hungry children, removed more than a dozen children from the Seed of Wisdom house and charged 2 Move women with child neglect. The Dotson girls spent several weeks in foster care. Disgusting. After which their Move caretakers regained temporary custody of all the children while they worked on their appeal. The women piled the kids into the back of a U-Haul and drove them back to Philadelphia against court orders, but the Virginia authorities didn't pursue them. I'm not sure there's any further action we can take, the assistant Commonwealth's attorney told a UPI reporter. With no attempt at formal negotiations, more than 500 police officers tried and failed to force Move out with smoke grenades, pepper foggers, small explosives, and more than 10,000 rounds of ammunition. Fire trucks with mobile water towers blasted the house. 12 hours later, Philadelphia authorities signed off on a shocking last resort. A police lieutenant in a helicopter dropped the satchel charge of C4 and the mining explosive Tovex onto Move's flat tar paper roof, which was cluttered with lumber and cans of gasoline. Police Commissioner Gregor Sambor then told the fire department to let the fire burn, so that his officers could gain a tactical advantage when Move inevitably fled the building. Within an hour, the blaze had collapsed the roof of 6221 and was swallowing the adjacent houses. A crowd gathered at the barricades. "My God," one of them said, "they killed the children." None of Move's adult members would speak to investigators, so Siegel didn't yet know who was in the house or how many victims he should account for. He needed someone trained in skeletal analysis to sort the commingled bones as soon as possible. But in 1985, there were only 34 board-certified forensic anthropologists in the entire United States. Over the next 2 years, 2 grand juries declined to indict anyone for the deaths of 11 people and the razing of a vibrant Black neighborhood. There were apologies and resignations, lawsuits and settlements, but the only person who went to prison in connection with the Move bombing was Ramona Africa, the sole adult survivor, on riot and conspiracy charges. Mann left Penn for Princeton in 2001. His departure left Monge in control of nearly all the museum's human remains, including those from the Move bombing, and for years to come, little was heard about them. In 2014, Philadelphia Magazine named Monge the year's best museum curator and sent the young reporter named Malcolm Burnley to profile her. By then, Monge had 2 roles. One as associate curator in charge overseeing the museum's physical anthropology section, and another as an adjunct associate professor in the school's anthropology department. The university never hired her in a tenure-track teaching position, but Monge, a warm, attentive instructor who encouraged younger women in a highly combative, predominantly male discipline, was well liked by her students and popular with museum donors. Burnley wrote a glowing profile of Penn's renowned bone collector and returned to the museum months later to give Monge issues of the magazine. It was then, he told me, that Monge approached him with a more disturbing tale. She said that the 1985 Move Commission had engaged in a cover-up, he said, and then she and Mann had been fired from the case because they wouldn't go along with it. Monge also had an idea. With DNA testing more widely available, she could now determine the true identity of this Jane Doe. The DNA test never happened. As this was happening, one of Monge's undergraduate advisees, Jane Weiss, the student who appeared in the Coursera video, was finishing her senior honors thesis on the Move Jane Doe. Weiss wrote in the 2019 paper that she examined the bones of two Move victims, body B1 and unidentified body G, and included an X-ray of an occipital bone from G that was scanned at Penn in 2018. Paul Mitchell would later come to believe it was the same occipital he remembered seeing in the Move box. In late April 2021, Consuela Africa and Janet Africa, the mother of Delicia Africa, held a news conference in West Philadelphia with two other women who lost children in the Move bombing. The Penn Museum issued a public apology to Move ahead of the event. It meant little to Consuela. We will never get a chance to embrace our children, hug them, and kiss them, she said. We will never have the feeling of love to put them to our breasts because they're not here. Her voice tightened. Because this government took them. She fled the room in tears. Penn paid for a white infant coffin, and the funeral home kept the remains inside it until Move decided what to do. Consuela never made that decision. Right before our first interview in May 2021, she contracted the coronavirus. She died in Penn's hospital on June 16th, her last remaining child, Lionel Dotson. Lionel was unprepared for an email he received in September 2021. It came from a lawyer the city had hired to investigate the mishandling of the Move bones. The medical examiner's office currently has some remains that were identified as Katricia and Zanetta Dotson back in 1985, she wrote. These items have been in the medical examiner's office since that time. The bewildering details soon began to emerge. In 2017, a staff member at Philadelphia Medical Examiner's Office found a box of jumbled bone fragments and specimen jars from Move in the medical examiner's personal effects room. They seemed to be medical samples. Because that case was closed, the city's health commissioner, Thomas Farley, ordered a supervisor to cremate the box's contents as medical waste. For unknown reasons, the supervisors did not, and the box stayed at the medical examiners until May 2021, when the controversy at the Penn Museum prompted Farley to tell the mayor about it. Farley promptly resigned. Smithsonian Magazine. Nora McGreevy, April 2021. Museum kept bones of black children killed in 1985 police bombing in storage for decades. On May 13, 1985, in a display of state violence that stunned the nation, the Philadelphia Police Department bombed its own city. 11 people died in the explosion, including Move's founder John Africa and 5 children: 12-year-old Netta Africa, 14-year-old Tree Africa, 11-year-old Phil Africa, 12-year-old Delisha Africa, and 9-year-old Tommaso Africa. A fire sparked by the bomb destroyed 61 homes, an entire block, and left more than 250 people unhoused. As Lindsay Norwood reported for Vox in 2019, last week, renewed controversy over the bombing broke out after Maya Kusuto of Billy Penn reported that officials had never returned a set of remains thought to belong to 2 of the victims, Tree and Delisha, to their families. They were bombed and burned alive, Africa Jr. said. And now you want to keep their bones? News of the controversy over the Move victims' remains broke just days before the city of Philadelphia is slated to honor the 36th anniversary of the event, notes the Inquirer. Last November, the Philadelphia City Council formally apologized for the bombing, as Darrell Bell reported for the Philadelphia Tribune at the time. Whereas the Council of the City of Philadelphia acknowledges the immeasurable and enduring harm caused to citizens across our city, region, and country as a result of officially sanctioned actions by the City of Philadelphia at 6221 Osage Avenue on May 13, 1985. Whereas the Council of the City of Philadelphia acknowledges recklessness in communication, negotiation, and conflict resolution management on the part of City of Philadelphia officials in crucial matters related to the Move family, their neighbors, friends, and the first responders leading up to, on the date of, and following the tragic events on May 13th, 1985 in the 6200 block of Osage Avenue. Whereas the leadership of the City of Philadelphia failed to use the best judgment and strategies to prevent unnecessary pain and suffering to the Move family, their neighbors, friends, and the first responders. Whereas the Council of the City of Philadelphia acknowledges the destruction of 61 homes. Whereas the Council of the City of Philadelphia acknowledges the fundamental injustice, cruelty, brutality, and inhumanity of the Move bombing. Whereas, in order to evolve and progress toward a more equal and just society, we must learn from heinous government actions of the past. Whereas, the Council of the City of Philadelphia hereby establishes an annual day of observation, reflection, and recommitment. Resolved by the Council of the City of Philadelphia. Further resolved. Introduced by Council Member Jamie R. Gauthier, 3rd District. Co-sponsored by Council Member Cheryl Parker, 9th District. Council Member Helen Jim at large. Do the right thing.